It is time right now to bring in Arthur Schwartz, the food maven. Arthur joins us on a Monday morning. We rebroadcast on the week and also on the weekend, talking about food. Good morning, Arthur.
Food, glorious
food. That's right.
It's finally eating weather again.
And cooking weather, really.
And cooking, yes. I woke up this morning thinking broth. I'm out of broth now for at least a month. But during the summer, it's too hot to make broth. Anyway, it's not too late to make impeachment pie.
Okay.
Now, this idea came to me immediately as soon as Nancy Pelosi announced the inquiries. However, a lot of people beat me to it. Within days, on my Facebook feed, there were references to impeachment pie. There's a woman who grows peaches who said, I have a lot of green peaches on the tree. They're hard and sour. I should make impeachment pie with them. I was thinking, making sort of a peach custard pie, and in the custard I would use an amaro, which is Italian bitters. Doesn't have to be medicinal bitters. Some of them are quite, delicious just to drink for their own sake. Even when you're not having gastric distress, but they do work. By the way, amaro. By the way, an amaro is very, 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 very trendy. Is the word? I hope it's not trendy, but Americans have discovered amaro. We have a new shop here in Park Slope, a new wine shop called Amaro, and they have the largest selection of Amari, plural is Amari that I've ever seen. I asked the other day for a Sicilian Amaro, and there were 3 from Sicily alone, and from the top to the tip of the boot, they make Amari. Anyway, I didn't do the impeachment pie, but my friend with the peach tree did photograph hers and put it on Facebook or Instagram, or I don't go to Instagram, but who knows where she put it. I saw it.
When you talk
about...
Anyway,
I thought that was very funny, that literally within days, there were all these possibilities for making impeachment pie.
You talk about impeachment pie, but the first full-time job, the second because I got fired at the first real full-time job I had in Kingston, New York, a salesman when the impeachment hearings came up for Richard Nixon. And we were a CBS network affiliate, so he went out and we carried all the reports. He went out and sold underwriting to Kentucky Fried Chicken to cover the impeachment reports. How classless is that? But we made a lot. We made a lot of money on it. Yes. Anyways, impeachment.
A lot of jokes will be made.
Yes.
I'm not sure what we get after the peach. It happened just to be the end of peach season. So no, but I'm all for overcast, even rainy fall weather. Although I have a hunch it's not raining here. It's not going to rain here. It's just going to be overcast for days, but still cool enough to put up a big pot of soup. So my craving, it ends up, and how I know this is I look at in my computer files for whatever, and recipe or seasonal thought, and I go and I find that I still have the same seasonal thought. So I was craving my grandmother's sweet and sour cabbage soup this week, and I'm going to make some today. But I looked at my own recipe published in Soup Suppers. I have to say my best-selling cookbook of all it's a paperback. It's still out there in imprint. You can buy it on Amazon, no problem. I just got a royalty check for $12.80. You see, people, cookbooks don't make you rich. I mean, that's sort of cab fare to go to the movies.
Just barely.
Well, here it's okay. Right. It'll pay for my cab fare. It'll actually have $2 extra. In any case, so I look at my recipe published in Soup Suppers, and in fact, I say, well, I like to make this in October when the tomato season intercepts with the cabbage season, and you get them both. Freshly harvested cabbage is very sweet and juicy. And in fact, in the old days in recipes, they would actually say new cabbage, and there is a difference. And the tomatoes, this is the very, very end of the tomato season. In fact, up in the northwest corner, you might not have any anymore because you had a frost the other night, didn't you? I track these things. Uh-huh. Anyway, there are tomatoes still around here. So anyway, I look at the recipe and I say, I don't want to make it that way anymore. In addition, in this recipe published in Soup Suppers, I browned the meat. I was in a very French mode in those days, and thought this would make the soup better, but in fact, I don't think it does. I browned the meat being flanken. This is the traditional meat for for Eastern European Jewish cooking. You always put a piece of flanken in the pot, or you made flanken for its own sake, which I do. But you put a piece of flanken in the pot to give the soup a little beef flavor. And, of course, the flanken. Flanken is, by the way, short ribs, but cut across the bones instead of in the same direction as the bones. So instead of, let's say, 3-inch piece with a 3-inch bone in it, you end up with a 1-inch piece with 5 little pieces of bone in it. And the bone is very good for itself, for giving substance and flavor to your broth. Anyway, so in the recipe published in Soup Suppers, I brown the meat, and then I brown onions, or at least I saute onions. And then I add to the tomatoes and other ingredients, very, very few other ingredients, including cabbage, of course. So I wouldn't do it that way. And I realized, a lot of people say, oh, well, I make your recipe from whatever book it is. I've written 7. And I love it. And then I look at the recipe and say, I wouldn't make it that way anymore. This is the way I did it 25 years ago. But you evolve in your cooking style and your thoughts about ingredients and the availability of ingredients. So here's what I would do today, which is, in fact, by the way, so finding good meat is not so easy. And in the case of flanken, it varies from being nice meat just like in short ribs, nice, amount of meat on ribs, very, very well marbled and even layered with fat, or it could be all fat. I was in a market just yesterday looking for flanken, and they had flanken, sure enough, but it looked like bacon. It was so fatty. It really wasn't something I wanted to put in my soup, even though when I make cabbage and sweet and sour cabbage soup, I always make it the day before I'm going to eat it so that I can skim off any fat. And also, by the way, the recipe in Soup Suppers calls for way more meat than my grandmother ever would have used. And I think when I make it today, I'm going to go back to Grandma's way. Grandma, by the way, her name was Elsie Binder Sonken. And her she was born in Brooklyn, but her family was from Belarus. So I'm assuming this is a Belarusian kind of soup. Some people call this cabbage borscht, and we just called it sweet and sour cabbage soup. And the prize in the soup was, of course, the piece of meat that was put in, the flanken. So I am thinking, everybody should get a piece of flanken. In my published recipe, I have way more flanken, so that there is enough. Because this book, Soup Suppers, is about main course soups. And sure, if you put in a lot of meat, it really is a main course. But we never ate it as a main course. We ate it as soup. And the prize, the piece of flanken, or maybe it was made in large quantities, so there may have been more than one piece of flanken, went to, of course, my father or my grandfather or both, or my uncle if he was there. Although I don't think he liked this very much, because he didn't like anything that had fat in it. So anyway, here's what I would do today. Instead of browning the meat, I would just put it in a pot of water. I would say a pound for making enough for 6 to 8 people, a couple of quarts of soup. 1 pound of flanken is enough, or 1 pound of short ribs, and try to find some that have some meat on the bone, so to speak. Not so to speak, literally. So and put them in a pot. I would say a 5-quart pot, covered with water. So let's say 2 quarts of water, and also some salt, a couple teaspoons of salt, and bring that to a simmer. And skim off any, well, I'm going to call it schmutz. That's a Yiddish word for dirt or scum. I don't like the word scum. Schmutz is a good word. Skim off any schmutz that comes to the top. And as soon as it's not giving off schmutz and it's cooked for about, let's say, a half hour, this is the meat in there, you add the other ingredients. And that would be 2 pounds of cabbage, cored and shredded. So that's a smallish to medium head of cabbage. 2 pounds. Most of the cabbage I buy edges up to 3 pounds. So 2 pounds, but with the core in it, weigh 2 pounds, and core it, and shred it as fine as you are able to with your kitchen knife. And you should yield about 10 cups of cabbage. So put that in the pot now with the simmering water and meat. And an onion, I would chop it up, or just 1 medium onion, or a sweet onion is good for this, by the way. So you can either dice it or slice it, whichever you want. And salt, of course. Well, we said salt already. And pepper, a good amount. My grandmother liked peppery soup. And I always say, if you want this is a joke, but not a joke. If you want your food to taste like your grandmother's, you have to use white pepper ground in the can that's been stored next to the stove for at least a year, which means it's not very potent. Anyway, my grandmother would add pepper and add pepper and add pepper, and this is why I know she had to add so much. Now you make it sweet and sour. So I would say 1/4 cup, you can add a little bit more later, of sugar. And I don't use lemon juice because I have availability of something called sour salt, which is citric acid crystals. I have a lot. You only use, maybe for this whole pot of soup, I would say a half a teaspoon. As I said, at the end, you can adjust the sweet and sour. So I would start off with 1/4 cup of sugar and blah, blah. And then 1 full can, 1 28-ounce can of plum tomatoes, chopped up or crushed with your hand, whichever way you enjoy doing it. I have to say that in my published recipe, it was fresh tomatoes. But I think now, 25 years later, I think it's sort of a waste of fresh tomatoes. And the canned tomatoes give it a body that the fresh tomatoes will not. And in fact, my former unlamented mother-in-law, late mother-in-law, used to add also, besides the can of plum tomatoes, she would add a can of tomato puree. So that would really boost the tomato quality of this dish. I don't think it needs that much tomato. A 28-ounce can of tomato is plenty. Anyway, you bring that to a simmer, and you let it simmer until the meat is just about falling apart. You poke a fork in, and if the bones separate and the meat is very tender, it's ready. I would refrigerate the soup overnight and skim off any hardened fat that's on the top. And if you want to, you can strip the meat into pieces and put it back in the soup, discarding the bones. Or you can serve the prized pieces of meat to whoever gets the prize at your table. And, of course, when you reheat it, I want you to taste it again. And we always adjusted this soup. It depends on the cabbage, mainly on the cabbage. Anyway, the sweetness of the soup and also your taste. So my grandmother would say it should taste winey. That was her word. In other words, have an acidic edge, but also some kind of deep base note flavor from the tomatoes and from the meat. And that's why I added extra meat to it when I was publishing this in Soup Suppers, because I thought you should have more meat, and you would have and brown the meat, and it would have a deeper base flavor. But actually, I think the other way is way easier. For one thing, just boiling the meat, and I think in fact you end up with a better broth. So, by the way, this is not a brothy soup.
It's a chunky soup.
This should be a soup thick with cabbage, and the tomatoes, of course, disintegrate, so they form the base in the broth. It's good soup, and also freezes very well. And if you want to make you want to flesh that out into a whole meal, personally, I think some great bread is in order. Hard to find great rye bread these days, but that's definitely what we would have eaten with it. I don't know. These days, if you can't find great rye bread, any bread you love.
Okay.
A nice whole grain bread would be good with this. And also potatoes. I know families, we didn't do this in our family, but I know families that always would serve this kind of soup with a boiled potato, either in the bowl or on the side. Not a bad way to go.
Okay, so with a boiled potato with a little butter and parsley, little olive oil?
No.
Just naked?
Just a potato.
Just naked.
Butter and parsley.
I always found boiled potatoes,
Well, you put it in the soup. The whole point is to have something to starch up the soup. And I would dunk bread into it. That's my favorite thing to do.
What did you put in Soup Suppers?
I think potatoes.
Okay.
I'm not going to look, but I'm pretty sure it was.
My copy's at home, so I can't.
Potato, but I would not put parsley. First of all, let me just say, my grandmother was not kosher, but she would never dream of putting butter on the table or on a dish if she was serving something based on meat, even though she was not really kosher. I mean, she was so not kosher that after my grandfather died, one of her favorite things to do was to make lobster tails in the toaster oven. So she didn't want broiled lobster tails. Not a bad thing to do in your toaster oven, by the way, if you have a toaster oven. People still have toaster ovens, don't they?
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't, so that's why I'm asking the question. In fact, my nephew has one in his kitchen that it took me a couple of mornings to figure out how to work it right because it's been so long. But yeah, so that's how not kosher she was. I once asked her, "Why? How you love a ham steak? How come you don't cook a ham steak for yourself? Because that's easy. You throw it in a skillet, and that's it." And she said, "Oh, I don't want to cook ham in my house. I eat it at your house."
The broiled lobster tails is just reminding me of my mother, who just the biggest treat ever for her was broiled lobster tails, and I always thought that fresh lobster was better. I never quite got it, but
these were frozen. I'm certain.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I just never.
By the way, I love to this day I love lobster tails. By the way, my grandmother made this for herself with lots of butter on it. That was her treat for herself, which she treated herself to frequently. But do you ever hear of Lobstergram? They used to be a sponsor of mine when I was on commercial radio, and Lobstergram is a first-rate organization, and you can order fresh lobster tails from Lobstergram. And if you go on their website, I haven't been on the website in a long time, but if you go on their website, I'm sure they may have they have several varieties of lobster tail. I mean, it could be Maine lobster tail, it could be South African lobster tail, which is a different kind of lobster. Blah blah. I don't even know what they are because I'm not an expert in lobster tails, but and it's a very high quality product, shipped to you overnight, I believe. Lobstergram. I could go for a lobster tail, actually, but it's Yom Kippur, so I think...
You better do it quickly.
Yeah. It's very interesting. For those who don't know, Yom Kippur, as we used to call it, or now everybody says Yom Kippur, and it is spelled that way. is the holiest day of the Jewish calendar. It's the day where you pray for atonement. You atone for your sins by praying all day, and saying it's like confession, except it's all in one day. You have to confess for a whole year, and if you don't remember what you need to confess about, it's written. So you confess it. You also confess for sins you never did. So anyway, it's a fast day. From would be tomorrow night until Wednesday night. You're not supposed to eat, drink, anything, even brush your teeth. And what's ironic is that all I've heard from in the last week is about people's plans for their eating on Yom Kippur, because a lot of families have a big meal before the fast starts on Tuesday evening. And my family, we didn't have a big meal. We had a meal together, but it wasn't like a big meal, because my grandmother and grandfather's theory was that if you ate a lot, you'd want to eat more. So having a more Spartan meal prepares you for the fast. That my grandfather literally would have told you that. So, but then we did have a feast to break the fast, and a lot of families, in fact, that's sort of the big meal of Yom Kippur for most families, is the break fast or breakfast. But it's served after sundown on Wednesday, and I don't think this is traditional with it was not traditional with every family that I knew when I was growing up, but these days it's become sort of written that you have smoked fish, bagels, lox, cream cheese, salads, like that to break the fast on Yom Kippur. I knew a family down the street, and they really took the word breakfast seriously. They started off with oatmeal. In our family, we started off with melon, with cantaloupe, and then we went on to all those things I just mentioned. But there were other families had other traditions that did not involve bagels and lox. However, it is the break fast is usually a dairy meal, meaning based on milk products, cheese, various breads, butter, because you haven't been allowed to cook for a day. You're coming off of a fast, and it's a cold meal. You come home from synagogue, and you can take it all out of the refrigerator. And that's, I think, the reason that it became, for most people, a dairy meal. I think if you had servants, if you were really rich, maybe it wasn't a dairy meal. Then you could have some Gentile servant prepare your food.
Were you allowed to turn the oven on?
I don't think you're allowed to do anything.
Right. That was my recollection.
No. And also, it's one people do eat hot meat meals on Sabbath, and what they do is the ovens have. I'll tell you a story. I was making. Now this is a chandra, a sin practically, but I was cooking in this context. I was cooking a whole pork butt, and it needed to cook for 12 to 18 hours, and of course that meant overnight. I woke up in the morning and the oven was off, and I went into a panic because I thought, oh my, the meat's been sitting there in a turned-off oven and it could spoil and everything. And then I realized my oven had an emergency turn-off after 12 hours, so it really had only been turned off maybe a half an hour when I got up in the morning. And so the meat was going to be okay. And then I read the instruction book and found out that there's a Sabbath override to my 12-hour turn-off, because if you were kosher and Sabbath observant, you would not be able to turn the oven on or off, for that matter, from sundown on Friday to sundown on Saturday. And people do keep food in the oven for that long. We have dishes, basically cholent is the Eastern European version of this, but every Jewish ethnicity has their own version of a casserole, basically, often based on beans, that is cooked overnight in a low oven. And that comes from the days when there were communal ovens, and you would carry your cholent, or whatever you call it, defina, if you come from Morocco or Tunisia, and you would carry it to the communal oven on your way to synagogue on Friday. And because there were zones that were cordoned off to allow Jews to carry certain things on the Sabbath, even though you're not allowed to carry, they would be able to carry this pot home on their way home after synagogue on Saturday, which would be sometime in early afternoon. So this pot did stay in the oven for a very long time, probably more than 12 hours, and it was divine, I have to say. And if you ever want to make cholent, I do have a very good cholent recipe. I guess it's in my Jewish home cooking book. I do like cholent. It's sort of like the Jewish cassoulet. I mean, you can make it really elaborate and not as peasanty as most versions are, because, of course, this was peasant food. These Jews who created it were not rich people.
Right.
So that's the story. So Yom Kippur, everybody the thing is you say have an easy fast if you're fasting, and enjoy the break fast if you're doing that.
Which is the fun part.
Or at least have a bagel in honor of Yom Kippur.
Right. Okay. We can do that.
Yeah.
All right.
All right. So onward and upward to cabbage soup.
Sweet and sour.
Sweet and sour. Now, that would be a very good thing to eat
for a breakfast
before a fast.
Okay.
It's filling. It's healthy, actually, with all that cabbage. And as my grandfather would say, being Spartan, the best meal prepares you for the fast.
All right.
All right. Have a great week, everyone.
And
I'll see you. Oh, next week it'll be Sukkot. That's a really joyful holiday.
Right. We go from
a lot of Jewish holidays this time of year.
That's right. We go from misery to joy.
Exactly. Isn't that the story of life?
Yes, something like that.
Not just Jewish life.
No, life.
Okay. Take care, guys.
Love to Bob.
Arthur Schwartz, the Food Maven, here on Robin Hood Radio. You can always hear him at robinhoodradio.com. Click on Arthur Schwartz, the Food Maven. Underwriting support for Arthur Schwartz, the Food Maven, John Andrews Restaurant on the Hillsdale Road in South Egremont, 413-528-3467. On the web, jarestaurant.com. Rubiners Cheesemongers and Grocers on Main Street in Great Barrington, 413-528-0488, rubiners.com. Hillsdale Home Chef. More information, 518-325-7000, hgshomechef.com.